Good morning or afternoon now, I guess. Thank you all for attending the panel today. My name is John. My preferred pronouns are he, his, him. And I'm currently working with the Institute on the Environment here in Duluth. This semester, we're putting together these panels related to the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And today's panel is connected to number 11, 12, and 15, as well as several others. So I think never-ending focus on sustainability is so important, especially as there's a lot of other kind of distracting things going on currently. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I think it's important. So this project is funded by the IonE and the Rapid Response Grant through the GPS Alliance. And we have kind of approached putting these panels together by purposely working with faculty, so the conversations can directly benefit their classes and anyone else here today. So thank you to those who are also joining. And we're trying to intentionally interweave these SDGs into the curriculum and kind of showcase that sustainability really is a thread through everything, or it should be a thread through everything. So keeping that perspective in mind is kind of how we've established these panels. So thanks, Dr. Savage, for allowing us to set this one up. I'm really excited about the group of people we have today to talk about sustainable forest management. We have Clark Christenson, who works for the city of Duluth as a city forester, Haley Golz, who works for the Minnesota Land Trust, and Heruth, who works with the Minnesota DNR. You'll hear more about their backgrounds in just a moment. A couple quick reminders, audience members, make sure that you stay muted during the conversation so we don't have distracting noises in the backgrounds. Please, by all means, if you have questions, feel free and type them into the chat as we go along. We're hoping to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the conversation for questions as well. So if you have them, you can save them till the end if you want as well. And then just a reminder that this conversation will be recorded and posted on the IonE Duluth website for future academic use. So at this point, again, thank you for coming, and I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Savage, who will be the moderator for our conversation today. So thanks, Dr. Savage.
Great. Thank you, John, and welcome everyone. Very excited to have the opportunity to have this panel come to our class today. So our class is Methods in Forest Ecology, and we've been spending the semester learning a lot about how you study the forest, what are different techniques, both in the field, and also how you study it in terms of looking at data, both from remote sensing and GIS, and also from data sets we've collected over the growing season. And right now we're sort of thinking towards the future now that we understand experimental design and a lot of the elements that go into studying a forest. What can you do with it, and what do we need to do with that knowledge? What are the current questions, and where is the future of forest management and forest-related research? And so we're very excited to have our three panelists here today. John already introduced me. I'm Jessica Savage. I'm a faculty at UMD. My specialty is actually in plant physiology and phenology, but I have a passion for forest ecology. And a lot of the work that I do is on woody plants in forests. I'm gonna be the moderator today. And so we have a set of questions that we're gonna start with. And then, as John mentioned, if you have questions along the way, please type them in the chat and we'll get to them when we have a chance. So first thing we'd like to do is give the opportunity for each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And so if we'll go around, and if everybody can give a brief description of yourself, your background, your career path, and what you currently do. What does your current job look like? So we can start with Anna, since you're first on my screen.
That sounds good, and thanks again for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Anna Heruth. I work for the Minnesota DNR. I work in the Division of Forestry as a silviculturist and invasive species coordinator. And I'll just kind of give you a background as to how I ended up here. You know, growing up, I always enjoyed the outdoors. I grew up on a farm. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I started out in anthropology. And then I traveled a bit after I was in school and graduated. And I decided that I wanted to work in the outdoors somehow. And so I found the Minnesota Conservation Corps. And back then, that was in the late 1990s, it was housed within the DNR. So I was a DNR employee, and I worked with all the different divisions. So primarily forestry, but I worked with wildlife and fisheries and ecosystems, and really discovered that that's what I wanted to do. And so with the stipend that I received working for the Minnesota Conservation Corps, I went back to school and I went to Stevens Point and got my degree in forestry from there. And then from there, I joined the SCEP program, which was a student co-op program with the U.S. Forest Service, and that was actually up here in Grand Marais with the Superior National Forest. And I spent 3 years working for them, and I within the student co-op program, I also worked with all the different shops that they have there. So fire, silviculture, timber, all of the shops, and that was a great learning experience. And I chose to stay in silviculture. I didn't know that that was really my direction in college. I didn't think that I would go into silviculture. I thought I would go in, probably go into wildfire management, something like that. But my direction has continually been silviculture, and I've really enjoyed it. So 3 years after being with the Forest Service, I applied for a job with the Minnesota DNR, and I worked with them up in International Falls in the Little Fork area for about a year, and then was able to come back to Grand Marais, and I've pretty much been here ever since. So I work with the DNR. I'm able to kind of have my hands in everything, and I really enjoy that. And so I, you know, in the spring, plant a lot of trees. I'm also staffing for fires, put up timber sales in the wintertime, and then administer timber sales throughout the year. And then also manage invasives at the same time. So yeah, it's been good. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Haley, would you like to go next?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Haley Golz, and just like Anna, I started off just by loving the outdoors. I'm originally from Montana, so I spent all my time outside hiking and exploring, and I actually came to southern Minnesota for my undergrad, and that was interesting for me because I'd never been in a place with so little outdoors. And I was kind of shocked, and it kind of woke up my interest in conservation and wanting to have as much outdoors and outdoor opportunities around me as possible. So in undergrad, I did a bunch of classes and focused on conservation and restoration type topics as an undergrad. I've also always loved plants, just for plants' sake. I love them. I think they're great and fascinating and do really cool things. So I actually took a side journey. I kind of moved away from conservation towards organic farming, and I did that for a little while, which was just fun and interesting. And I feel like I learned a lot of things that actually do apply to some of the stuff I do now in some ways. But I started to realize I just really missed that kind of work. So I moved back towards conservation, and the next main thing I did, there was a little moving in there, but I worked for California State Parks in the Santa Cruz district. We covered a huge acreage out there, did tons of things. There's a lot of invasives in California, so we spent a lot of time removing invasives and then planting afterwards. We had the largest prescribed fire crew for the state, so we did a ton of burning. and just tons of other things for state parks, you know, things with trails and all sorts of stuff. And then I moved from there I actually did my grad degree at UMD, and Jessica was on my committee. And I studied restoration and climate change, how those might go together and what we're planting and what we might use to plant to achieve the highest success in restoration. And interestingly enough, I assume Anna and Clark might have a little more experience in like traditional forestry than me. I've always been so focused on the herbaceous understory species, so that was what my research was in. So I'm learning more about forestry as I go along. But after that, I jumped to where I am now. It's the Minnesota Land Trust, and I am the private lands restoration program manager. So all my work happens on private lands, which is really interesting. It wasn't really a thing I'd thought about before starting this job. I always thought about public lands, and that's where all the conservation happens. But we actually do a ton of work on private lands, and I cover right now the whole state. So I'm doing everything you could imagine, from converting farmland back to prairie, some forest management, wetland restorations, all sorts of stuff all over. And that is pretty fun and engaging, and like I said, learning a lot.
Wonderful. And Clark?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm enjoying this. And my path, I think similarly when I was, you know, in elementary and high school, if I could be outside, that's where I was. I certainly fought against going into forestry because my father was a forester for the state of Minnesota. I eventually got over myself and ended up enrolling at Stevens Point. And of course, when you enroll in a program like that, one of the realities you have to realize is that it's going to be like 90% males, 10% females, which is a way of covering my tracks, because I actually went to school with Anna, but I don't expect that she would remember me at all. She had very long hair at the time. Am I right? Yes. Okay. So I also worked in the Minnesota Conservation Corps for a couple summers. I went to school at Stevens Point, transferred there my junior year, and then got out, worked some different government jobs, you know, seasonally, and some other gigs, and then you know, and across the Western U.S. Ended up back here in Duluth and started doing my own consulting for private landowners, which is very interesting at times and also very frustrating at times, which I'm sure Hallie can recognize and sympathize with. And after doing that for about 10 years, the city of Duluth was advertising it was like 13.5-hour position as the forester. And I could actually point you to a map of where I was when I thought, you know, that might be interesting. Maybe I should just try it. It was out in the middle of the woods up by 3 lakes. And so I applied, and let's face it, no one else who's qualified really wants a 13.5-hour position, 13.5 hours per week. So I applied and got it. It was, I'm sure I was the best qualified. We'll go with that. And then after working full-time or part-time, for them for close to a year, they opened it up full-time, and I got on board. So my responsibilities here, 90% of my time is taken up dealing with the urban trees. So my career path has taken a severe turn here, from dealing with, you know, forested landscapes to now the more urban built landscape, trying to get trees to survive for as long as we can, really. But Duluth does also have, we're in the process of a land swap with St. Louis County. And when that's done, we'll have about 10,000 acres of green space. So management of that comes down to myself, and then one of my coworkers, the natural resources coordinator, and of course a lengthy public review process anytime we want to do anything, really. So that's my career path, and that's sort of my areas of responsibility.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Clark. So the first question that we have for all of our panelists is thinking about this topic that we're dealing with today, which is sustainable forestry. And what we're wondering is, what does sustainable forest management and restoration practice look like to you? So we can go around and do it in the same order if you wanted to start, Anna.
Yes, thank you. I ended up writing down a definition for myself, so I think I'm going to read that so I don't miss anything that I want to say here. And this is for sustainable forest management, because I think restoration and sustainable forest management are really two different things. But as far as sustainable forest management goes, I consider it practicing land stewardship that integrates foresting, growing, tending, and harvesting trees for timber products with the conservation of soil, water, wildlife, and fish habitat and aesthetics. And also that land managers have an adherence to a land ethic for forest conservation and sustainable management, and an understanding of the cumulative effects on a landscape ecosystem scale. I think that that really encompasses what I see as sustainable forest management. And one of the things that I really wanted to bring up in this discussion is that, at least with the DNR, and I think this goes for most government agencies, that we have a checks and balances system with sustainable management of forests. And you know, that can look a lot different depending on what level of government you're at. So a more local government can look a lot different than, let's say, on the U.S. Forest Service national scale. And some of these things that are in this checks and balances is, and I think this is the foundation for the DNR, is our site level guidelines, or what you might call BMPs, or your best management practices. And these are really just the basic applied or on the ground management that we do. We have these guidelines that cover pretty much everything from rutting, a rutting matrix, to how many trees we're going to leave out on the landscape, and what we're going to be doing with reserves and buffers along streams. All of that is spelled out, so that the basic level, that foundation, is there for every timber sale that we have and every management practice that we do on the land. And this ensures that we are accountable to Minnesotans, and that we're accountable to the future generations as well. So I think that that really kind of gets at, for me at least, that gets at that sustainable management, forest management.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Are you here, Haley? I see you, I think.
I am back. I don't know what happened.
No, that's all right.
I think we're all used to that now.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. So what does sustainable forest management or restoration look like to you?
Well, I missed a little bit what Anna was saying, so if I repeat, I apologize. I guess the thing that I had a few things that came to my head right off the bat, and I would just say that I also am dealing with these issues, I think, in a really different way than like Anna or Clark, or we all have our unique situations, but on the lands I'm working with, it's not always so much that you have to, balance timber production or things. It's more about just promoting certain types of habitat. So the things that came to my mind right away were the things that I aim for and want to aim for on our properties are just a high diversity of all different kinds of like structure and age class and species, and just like as varied and diverse of a forest as you can have. It seems like the research tends to say that just provides more services to people and wildlife. And, that depends, I'm sure you've talked about this on different scales. It doesn't have to be at like a 1 foot scale, but on my properties, I'm trying to think about that and apply that in the way that makes the most sense. That high diversity in a lot of different ways. One thing that I struggle a little bit with our private landowners is just not over managing. Sometimes people want these like perfect parks with no woody debris on the ground, and so trying to impart to people like what a really healthy sustainable forest should look like, and to allow just some downed and woody debris and not overdoing it. And then another big thing that I've been trying to incorporate is just trying to like mimic or reintroduce natural disturbance. So fires or like wind throw, and a lot of our properties are maybe smaller than what you would work with in the DNR, and so maybe they don't have some of those similar dynamics going on. So we're trying to mimic them or recreate them as best as possible to, again, like impart that diversity of all the different characteristics. And then I don't know, there may be some disagreement on this, but I feel like there's just not that many like really old stands. So I'm always trying to like support older stands of trees when I can, because there's a lot of younger ones around, in my opinion. Maybe not in every place, but at least on our property, especially where we don't need to worry about timber production, I've been kind of aiming towards supporting some older stands of trees and old growth. Although, of course, that's a long process. So just working on it, getting started. Yeah, I think those are my main points that came to mind when I thought about sustainable forest management.
Great. And Clark?
So when I was consulting, I always had the task of trying to explain to landowners, why is this your best option, whatever this may be, and how do I convince them that I'm not just making this up, right? To some extent. But I think Anna's definition, Haley's definitions or examples are both very good, but I was always trying to get something more simple, because most people don't have the attention span for forest management policies or procedures, unless they're really interested in it, or they happen to be, have a professor who makes them sit in on a webinar about it. So what it eventually came down to me, thinking about this off and on through the years, is good forest management, if we want to call it sustainable forest management, is that which gives you more options or an equal number of options in the future. So if you're looking at any particular parcel, there are things you can do to it, whether that's harvesting timber, which is typically how foresters think, that down the road you're going to be buttonholed into doing one thing only. There's also things that you can do which will kind of keep your options open. Now, to grab specifics or examples, if you're on a really sandy site, really drought prone, and it's an aspen stand, could clear cutting that aspen be the best thing to do? Absolutely. We have probably thousands and thousands of acres of really bad aspen. And by bad, I would say it's growing poorly. It probably has lots of disease issues. And there are other species, if it's a sandy site, probably pine, that would be healthier. They'd grow faster. They'd look better. They would provide, over time, more varied wildlife habitat. So there are, as soon as we start saying certain practices are always bad, that tends to be a warning signal to me. Only certain things are allowed. With that said, there are restrictions that we should follow. I mean, Anna mentioned BMPs. There are certain things we shouldn't be doing in the summer, for example, especially on fine textured soils. They tend to compact very easily. So for me, that's what I came down to explaining to landowners. Let's do forest management in a way that either preserves the number of options or increases them down the road. And down the road might be 5 years, it might be 30 or 50 years. Forest management isn't something that you get to, you get to dress it up and then look at it again in 5 years and you're done with the project. It's ongoing and it's definitely very long term.
Great, wonderful. So our next question is just thinking about the practice of it all and your jobs and what you've encountered. And what we are curious about is what you think the biggest challenges are that you're facing when you think about management in forests or restoration of forests. So we can start with Anna again.
Yeah. The challenges that we're facing right now, they're kind of immediate challenges within the DNR. And one of the main ones for us up here, especially along the North Shore, 2 harbors, kind of in the Northeast region, is that we have the wood markets are diminishing up here. So Verso just closed. Our birch market is completely gone. And LP out of 2 harbors is really taking a little bit of aspen from all the different loggers. And so there's a quota that all the loggers have. So because of those diminishing markets, we also are losing a lot of our loggers. So the ones that have retired, you know, their families aren't continuing on that, on with logging, and there's not a lot of loggers that are coming in and starting up. And so we may be up in Grand Marais, we probably have 4 loggers. We used to have somewhere between 30 to 40 loggers up here. We have like 4 now. And that's like, logging is one of, you know, the biggest way that we manage our forests up here. And so that's, I don't know what that looks like in the future. I don't know that the economy is going to come back enough, or that there will be more mills that open. It doesn't look good. So that's one of our big challenges. There's also, well, with COVID, we lost a lot of our funding for our silvicultural projects beyond harvesting. So we have a very, very limited budget in doing site prep and planting, and really doing those TSI projects that maintain those plantations or the seedlings that we plant throughout the year. So we have to find other ways to either find funding or other ways to manage our forests. And I think that's our biggest challenge right now is that. And then also insect and disease issues are really big. The ones that are here right now is the emerald ash borer and spruce budworm. And if probably Clark knows this, and he probably works with folks that have spruce budworm issues, but it started in Finland, Minnesota, back in like 2012. We started to see it, and it started to expand. And now it's on the Lake County border, or I'm sorry, St. Louis County border, all the way to the Cook County border. And it's pretty much killed all of the balsam fir. So in the understory, the overstory, it's all dead. And because we don't have a market now with Verso, we don't have any way to cut balsam fir or spruce. And so we have these stands that we can't do anything with unless we go in and do a service contract, which would be a lot of money to cut that down, pile it, and burn it. So we're really struggling with management of our stands with a lot of different species that we can't harvest right now because there's no markets for it. And then also just one other thing with climate change as well. And out on timber sales in the wintertime, generally, you know, we have frost in the ground, we can get into these stands, and then probably in the last 3 to 4 years, we haven't been able to get loggers in to lowland spruce stands, timber sales with wet access. They can't get into them because they're just, we don't get that hard freeze that we need. So that's another challenge that we have. So those are probably the main challenges that I face in my job, kind of in the immediate right now. So thank you.
Great. Haley, do you want to add your thoughts?
I can jump in, and I can just say, I think I deal with them in a little different ways, but I know what Anna's talking about on a lot of those fronts. So maybe I'll start with some of that, because we also use loggers to do maybe slightly different types of cuts that are more selective, but we were already out. We already weren't really a high priority because our cuts didn't make any money. And now we're an even lower priority when we want to do forest management. So we've been really struggling with just getting anyone to be interested in our projects at all. They're so small. And so we do have to pay for all of our work that we want to do in forest management. So that definitely restricts the amount of that kind of work we're doing. And I've also had the same issues with climate change. I do a lot, not in this northern part of the state as much, but in like the metro or the south where we do buckthorn removal. And we often do that in the winter, but we haven't been getting good enough freezing temperatures, and it's been really hampering our clearing and like even just like oak savannas, which you would think wouldn't be as sensitive, but they can be. I've also been thinking a lot about climate change in that my main job is restoration, and so I'm planting a lot of plants out into the wild, and in places that, you know, things are going to change, and maybe there might be different precipitation or flooding. Some of our properties have weird drainage problems, and so just thinking a lot about trying to set up these restorations in a way that they'll be long lasting and provide a habitat without really knowing what's going to happen. And so I don't have any good answers to that. So that's a problem that I'm thinking about for sure. And restoration is really expensive, so I think it's something we really are worth thinking about and doing the best we can. And other big problems for me, I've kind of mentioned this, but working with private landowners is tricky and interesting. They have all their own conceptions of things or own preferences, which can be totally valid or kind of off the mark, and just trying to come together and compromise such that private landowners are happy with the work, but it also achieves the goals that you are looking for as an organization. Sometimes we'll walk away from a project because our funding, you know, specifies a certain type of thing that we need to see, so we will have to walk away sometimes, but we often can come to a really good compromise. It does involve a lot of work though, so that's always an issue. And on top of that, working with private landowners, we have a very limited amount of resources like after the big initial push. So I'm constantly thinking in the same way about climate change, but just in general with my restoration projects, how do I set this up so that it doesn't just like revert in 2 years? And a lot of that is finding landowners who have some capacity, but also just being really careful about picking my projects and weaving parts of the property to pick, or there's lots of factors that go into working with private landowners. And then, yeah, I guess another big thing that I think about, which I mentioned sort of before, was the kind of balancing, especially on these smaller private properties, how much good is there going to be in forest management? Sometimes maybe you could manage it a little more actively, but with the limited resources or limited acreage, maybe it's just better to leave it alone. So there's a lot of more complicated questions that come in with these small properties with private landowners. And yeah, I think those are the main things.
Great, thank you. And Clark?
Yeah, I agree about the markets. Since 2006, I think we've lost 7 mills in Minnesota that take either entirely aspen or some portion of their wood base was aspen. So that's a huge issue. If we don't have a market, I mean, the amount of forest management that you can actually accomplish is greatly diminished. You know, working at the city, they're maybe a little more willing to pay for these projects because we're dealing with such small acreage. 10,000 acres in the grand scheme of things is nothing, compared to what the DNR manages. They've got several million. The Forest Service in Minnesota alone, I think, has 1.5 million or 2. I'm a very small fish in a big pond here, but if we want to improve our forests, even for aesthetic reasons, and we don't really care about making money on it, we still have to figure out what to do with that wood if we're cutting it. So do we hire someone to cut it and leave it on the ground, which I think is a perfectly reasonable option. But then we also have to educate people. And you also have to educate them like, no, this isn't firewood. You can just go out and cut with your chainsaw, because that crosses multiple issues. And we don't want to go down that road. So having markets solves a lot of problems for us. We're doing a lot more work with like buckthorn, Japanese knotweed, and now looking at replacing ash, trying to replace ash in certain areas. All of those are great projects, but without a way to actually get someone there, even if they do it, quote, for free because there's value in the wood, that's acceptable to us. But if there's no value in the wood, then we're all of a sudden looking at a very different project. So that's certainly a huge issue, and it's probably not going to solve itself anytime soon. But I think for me and my job, the other big issue is just educating the citizens of Duluth. Like, why are we doing this, and why is this actually a good thing? Yes, it looks poor, like a bomb went off for a couple of years. However, that's temporary. And we need to look at what are the end results going to be. So for me, the markets, and then educating the populace on what we're doing, why we're doing it, what is the end result, and just sitting back and wait to some extent.
Great, thank you. So our last question here, and then we'll open it up for other questions that folks have, is what gets you excited about the future of work in this field? Do you want to start, Anna?
Yeah, so I think I wrote down a few things that I thought kind of got at the basics for me working within the DNR and with newer foresters and other partners. So I think probably one of the biggest changes I've seen since I started working in forestry back in like 2004 is that there's been so much coordination with other partners, and it seems to increase every year, where we're all trying to come together. And I just didn't see that back then. It was, Forest Service worked with their folks, and they had their boundaries, and the county and the DNR, and that was it. But now I think with the urgency of climate change and disease issues, I see a real coming together of everyone. Everyone's coming to the table, and we're all trying to figure out how are we going to do this together, because climate change doesn't care about those boundaries, and tree species don't recognize political boundaries. And so I think that's really hopeful to me that those things are occurring. And so I'm on the Cook County Invasives team and the Lake County Invasives team, and there's probably at least 10 different partners on those teams. There's a number of collaboratives that the DNR is involved with, and those all have all the different partners that are the Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, all these different partners that are coming together. And I just think that that's really amazing. I think the other thing that is really hopeful to me is that Minnesota is really on the forefront of assisted migration and climate change. And that can be, I should say the Midwest is really on the forefront. So NIAX and SFEC, the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Service, and the DNR are really coming together to do applied science and research in climate change and assisted migration. The SFEC just had an assisted migration forum that was really great, and there were people from all over the US that were on that call, because really it's the first that we're right on the forefront of it. We're doing the research, and I just think that's pretty great. And then the other thing that really kind of is something I've noticed over the last few years is that we have a lot of new foresters that are coming in that are just, they're so energetic, and they want to do sustainable forestry. And I think when I was back at Stevens Point, ecology and forestry were just kind of coming together. I don't know that it was, probably maybe 2 years before I started going there, they had kind of combined courses of forestry and ecology, and and now I can see that things are changing, and that climate change is really being taught, and that was not a part of the curriculum when I was there. And so these new foresters are coming in, and sustainable forestry is just kind of the backbone of what they were taught, and that climate change is also part of what they bring to the table when they come in as entry-level foresters. And so I think that those are really, those are broad ideas. I'm hopeful that maybe the economy will get better, that maybe we'll have a mill that opens or something, but I don't see those things happening. But I think that we're really, in the DNR, we're really adaptable, and we can find ways, and we will find ways to still manage sustainably. It'll take some time and some new ideas out there. So yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Haley?
Well, my excitement, I think comes from my particular position with the Land Trust. Like I said in the very beginning, I never really thought of conservation or restoration type stuff happening on private land. I'd always thought about it on public land. And so the more I've worked with the Land Trust and the more I see what we're doing across the state, it's just exciting to think that there's so many more places that kind of work can happen and is happening actively, because we have a certain amount of public land, and that's great. I support as much as we can get, but there's a lot of private land. So it's very encouraging to me to see the more partners I've made in my work, just to see the amount of this work that is happening in places you wouldn't expect it to be happening. And sort of similar to what Anna said, we have so many different partners, and we partner a lot with like county organizations, and there's just little habitat restoration projects and conservation easements and things happening all over the place, which is just really fun to see. It's just adding to habitat, and it's keeping things undeveloped. And if people maybe people don't know what a conservation easement is. It's like a legal document that you put on a piece of property so it can't be developed, which is, ours are in perpetuity forever. So these are big, awesome changes that are happening forever. And so these properties, you might not know, they might not be public, but they're going to stay like wooded, and maybe someday they'll be transferred to a public agency. And then the other really fun thing about working with private landowners is you get people way more engaged, I think, in nature. A lot of people come to us really interested, but in doing these conservation easements or restoration projects, it's really developing this ethic in the broader population, and we're developing this large landowner network of people who are actively doing things. And the more we get involved with them, the more excited they are, and the more they talk about it, and the more they spread the word. And so it's just, there's a lot going on that I never knew before that I think is going to impact other people's work as well. And then finally, I'll just say, I feel like obviously climate change is huge, and it's a thing that we all have to tackle. And I feel good that the work that I'm doing is one great thing to do to help ameliorate some of the effects of climate change. So it makes me feel good to be like actively doing things to impact that, because I think we need to be doing those right now. So
fantastic. And Clark?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things happening in the world of forestry and natural resources management in general. One of the better things is there's definitely more interest from the public, whether that's people, landowners, or people who are, just they have a bird feeder in their backyard and they really want to know more. I think that is great. I think a lot of these people, as land changes hands to a younger generation, which is continually happening, We're getting more landowners who are genuinely interested in not just, seeing more deer, but seeing their land managed well. And whether that means more of X, Y, or Z is sort of secondary to the equation. I think that's really great because, as Haley points out, I mean, privately owned lands account for, I think it's roughly half of the forested acres in Minnesota. So you can't ignore that piece of the pie at all. They have a significant influence on what's going on in the forest, and they, generally speaking, are managed not out of the desire to manage it, but rather the need to manage it. They see their forest is falling apart and it wasn't what it used to be. What should I do? A very passive management, I guess. So that's really exciting to see these, people more and more interested from all walks of life. I think it's really exciting to see the forest, the profession, embrace slightly different ways of thinking. And I would plug native plant communities at this time. I said I would, and it's appropriate here. I think they are a great way of classifying all lands in Minnesota. Actually, they cover everything except deep water systems. And if you really want to for lack of a better phrase here, figure out the forest, understand it on a deeper level. I mean, learning native plant communities and what makes them what they are is a great way to start. And we have more and more forestry based on those, or using that as a driving force for what they're going to choose to do. That is, I think, a great move. As I said, my dad was a forester for 35 years for the state of Minnesota, started in about 1970. And I happened to be out grouse hunting with my dog the other weekend. And I said, I was in this great area. It was a lot of hardwoods. I didn't see any grouse. But then they had these spruce plantations. Why? I mean, was that a thing? Like, spruce doesn't belong on hardwood sites as a plantation in Minnesota. And he said, yes, that's the way it was done, up through the 80s. If you had hardwood site planted into spruce, that's just the way to go. And to me, that's absolutely opportunity lost. There are much better ways to do it. I think native plant communities are a great way to inform your decisions, and also help you understand what's going on in the site. So that, I guess it's really piggybacking on Anna's idea that, forestry is integrating with ecology and these other fields, not just on the academic level, but also in the field.
Great, thank you. We can open it up if folks want to start with questions. I can also start with a question. I'll give people a chance to think through what they want to ask. So I know that Clark, you talked a little bit about education, and Haley talked about working with landowners and this idea of maybe this growing interest that people in the region have in preserving and taking care of their land. And I'm curious if there are, more specifically, is part of your job for any of you related to education, and how do you see the interface between what you do on a practical level in terms of forest management and education? How do they pair together? And anybody can answer it. I'll leave it open to any of you.
Well, I guess I could start briefly in just that, because all of our work happens on private lands, you can't do anything without the consent of a landowner. So there's a lot of education that's involved in just any time you set up a project, or even when my colleagues who do conservation easements do those, there's a lot of education that goes into that. And because we're a nonprofit organization, we also, rely on donors and different grant sources. And so we're spending a lot of time just trying to be a front-facing organization and telling people what we do and why we do it, and garnering support for that. And so it's kind of, I would say, for me and all my colleagues at the Land Trust, it's just kind of a woven into everything we do, because we wouldn't be able to succeed without it. And we're trying to grow that all the time. We're trying to start a new thing where we have all these existing landowners and they aren't as well connected as they could be, and they have all sorts of questions about how to manage their land. And I think we have like 600 or more easements right now, and so we can't get to them all. So we're trying to even create like a portal for them with resources and things. So it's a big part of the land trust work.
Yeah, since you mentioned me by name, certainly education is a huge part of my job. If you've ever seen a green ribbon tied around an ash tree, I know the guy that the URL will lead you to, should you follow it. And so that's been our largest outreach effort, is certainly educating landowners on Emerald Ash Borer and what it's going to do and what we're doing, really. But certainly when I'm out in the field with the crew removing trees or planting them, whatever it may be, invariably we get homeowners coming up to talk to us, and that's another opportunity to educate people that this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. And also, it appears you have an ash tree in your backyard. You should probably start to think about what you're going to do with that, because most people don't actually apply what we're doing, think, oh, maybe I should be thinking that. And that's certainly on the urban forestry side of things. The education has to be constant and hopefully effective. But getting to the forest management side of things, that's trickier, because now we're dealing with lands that are sometimes parklands. Sometimes they're just places that people have walked on trails, or we have different user groups using them. So the education is equally important, but it also becomes much trickier because you have to reach all these different groups. We're always open to suggestions on how to do that. But otherwise, it's a very large part of my job. And I sometimes try to pawn off certain interviews on people I work with, at which point they point to job descriptions and other things, and I end up doing it. So it's a part of the job. I don't mind it, actually, but sometimes it becomes a little too constant for my preference. I am deep inside a dirt forester who would rather be in the woods by himself. So therein lies the conflict.
I second that, Clark. I prefer to be in the woods, but I would say that I don't do as nearly as much education as Haley and Clark. My job is primarily working on our lands within our forests, and I don't have to work with another landowner to do that. I mean, we do have an interdisciplinary process that we go through with our other divisions to get input on our sites, for sure. As far as education and outreach, I probably do that more so with the Invasives program than I do with Silviculture. I do a lot of education with entry-level foresters that are coming in. So I'm constantly talking with them, helping them come up with ideas on how to manage a site. But we have private forest managers within the DNR that actually do the kind of the same work that Haley and Clark do. So they really, and kudos to all of you, because that is a really, it's a difficult job, because you're dealing with different personalities every time you talk with a new landowner, and it's kudos to you guys. So
great. So we have a question just for Haley, asking what range in size of privately owned parcels of land are you working on?
It's a great question. So right now, one of the smallest projects that I'm trying to set up is about 5 acres, and it's a invasive removal project of Oriental bittersweet and buckthorn, and that's in the southeast on like a steep bluff prairie, little beautiful, really diverse prairie that's tons of fun flowers on it. And then we have depending on the state, kind of decides the acreage a little bit. So we have a project in southwest Minnesota over by Marshall, if you know where that is, that is going to be, I think it's like 300 or 500 acres, and we're not going to do all the restoration at once, but we're going to hopefully chunk it off and restore it from farmland to prairie. So I have a very wide range, and this isn't part of the question, but I'll throw in there, they're kind of the same work for me because I do all my work through contractors. And so all my work is done just hiring people and talking to them and setting it up. So give me the big projects because then I get a lot done, but same amount of time.
That's great. I'll see if anybody else has other questions. There's also a second question for Haley, but I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask.
I'm kind of curious to see, I guess, the same question at Clark, if that's okay.
Yeah, so size of parcels that we work on, or project sizes, I guess. So that, yeah, it varies quite a bit. We don't bite off as big a chunks as Haley or Anna would, just because we're very limited in size. And quite literally sometimes because we're in between, two houses. But we have a number of partners that also work on our land through grants, doing invasive removal in particular. And those projects will go anywhere from, just a couple of acres on up to 40 acres or so. That's typical, but generally it's going to be much smaller parcels because we've got something planned for this particular area. And the first step is usually remove the invasives. Unfortunately, that's the reality of living in a very urbanized area. Well, at least to me, urbanized, but it is, it is what it is. So typically pretty small though for traditional forest management.
Great. Was there another question? I wasn't sure if somebody else was starting to chime in. Well, I can ask one more question, thinking about, at least for the students, since none of them are going to ask. I'm curious, what would be your main recommendations for people who are looking for careers in natural resources, either in terms of what you should do after you finish your bachelor's, and or what careers or areas are going to be the future of the field?
Well, I can start this. I would say, first of all, finish your bachelor's degree. That is, that puts you a leg up on a lot of people, and quite frankly, gets you into a job that will pay decent. But boy, there's a lot that you can do. I mean, there's so many different avenues. I would say if you don't really care for school, okay, as someone who's speaking who didn't really care for school, you should look at what are the avenues after this. If you want to go into wildlife, that's fine. But if you want a job with the DNR, you pretty much have to go to grad school and get your master's. There aren't a lot of options with just a bachelor's, as I understand. Now, forestry is, maybe we're a little more dim-witted. I don't know. But, a bachelor's will get you pretty far. So I'd say that's the first thing to look at. But then also, as far as areas that are really doing well, if you've got even a certificate in GIS, that can push you along quite a ways. And if you've got a degree, boy, you can move anywhere with that. And that's another consideration. If you want to be a forester, there are parts of the world where you simply will not have a job. But I think, so GIS is great. I think waters is another one. Lots of jobs, may require grad school, probably will. And those are definitely always in demand. Lots of jobs, relatively speaking, out there, and also very portable to really anywhere in the US.
And I guess I would add, I don't know, I feel like for myself and other people I know, if you can get on like a work crew, like these guys are in the Conservation Corps, or there's lots of similar ones, just to get some like in the field experience, so that you have some experience seeing how things actually work out, has seemed huge to me. In like state parks, that's where I started with state parks when I lived in California, was like on the field crew. And that was huge for me. I also sort of got into that by volunteering first for the Native Plant Society. So there's a lot of different ways to meet the right people, but getting on some crews that are actually doing stuff like out in the field can be a really good first step. And then I'll second what Clark said, I did find that like I kind of needed a master's degree to do the kind of stuff I wanted, which was more like ecology and plant-based stuff. And there's kind of a little bit of a ceiling that I hit up against before doing that. So, but you can find some really nice professors like Jessica, and it's not, the worst thing.
Yeah, I really agree with Haley. I think summer jobs or summer experience while you're in school is really important, whether that's, doing research where you're at UMD or wherever that may be. I did a lot of different summer jobs. I think I had a different summer job every year that I was in school. And I got a lot of experience out of all of them. And then you can put that on your resume, and that, that's so important to do that. And really even being involved in organizations within your college there are really important, because all of those look really good on your resume too. So I think that those are some things that I would do if I was still in college. As Clark was saying, it's probably more difficult to get a job in wildlife than it is in forestry. And I know when I was going to Stevens Point, one of the reasons that I went there was because they had 100% placement after college in forestry positions. And I had already been in school for almost 4 years in anthropology, and they had 0% placement of students after college. I had to go on and get and go into graduate studies if I wanted to go into anthropology. And so yeah, I think GIS is a really good place. Maybe also if you really are interested in climate change or making a change, policy and environmental law might be something that you're looking for. For me, it was, I tried silviculture and I really liked it. It was something like I said before, I didn't know that I was going to go into, and it has been my career. So try some things, see what you like. Maybe don't get yourself pigeonholed into one thing. So that would be my suggestions.
Great, wonderful, thank you. I don't know if John, you want to say some closing remarks, or if we should wrap it up. I think it's about 1, so we'll
respect everybody's time. I just want to say thank you. It was a really interesting conversation, and you all have such varied backgrounds that bring interesting perspectives to the table. So I can't thank you enough for being panelists in this discussion today. It's definitely worthwhile.